They're going to give all of you, I think, or maybe they've given all of you a little handout. This goes on top of, I used to be a teacher, so you have to put up, you have a book, you get a handout. I'm going to mention a website, and you have more opportunities than you can imagine. But I want to outline why we did this for a minute or two, starting with the book that you got, Winning the Future. I sat down last summer, and it just seemed to me that we clearly were engaged in an anti-campaign. You know, there was the anti-Kerry vote and there was the anti-Bush vote, and the campaign was remarkably negative. But there wasn't a clear formulation of what your generation has to do for America to be successful. And so I now have two grandchildren, Maggie, who will be 6 in October, and Robert, who just turned 4 last week. And I got to thinking about, what do we need to do so by the time they're adults, they're having the same country in terms of freedom and prosperity and safety that my parents and my grandparents worked and in some cases fought in order to make possible for us. And so I began to think about it, and I began to sort of organize it as a 21st century contract with America. I did that for 2 reasons. The first was that I think it's important to talk about the 21st century. I think we've been sort of in a 40-year time warp that goes back to the mid-1960s, and an awful lot of our current political bitterness and our current political divisiveness is actually just repeating the same fights for 40 years. But we're now in a different century. It's the century you're going to spend most of your life in. And it's a very different century. And we have to come to grips with how different it is. Second, the contract with America had really worked. It worked at both a political level, it worked at a government level, and it worked at a conservative policy level. It worked objectively in the following sense. It was a totally positive document. If you go back and you read the original contract with America, or you look at the TV Guide ad, which is the most expensive ad in the campaign, 2 full pages in TV Guide, deliberately not a political document. We wanted to go where people were. David Brooks was talking earlier about advertising on the Stairmasters. In a sense, that's why we were in TV Guide. It's totally positive. Didn't attack Bill Clinton, didn't attack the Democrats. It said, if you hire us, this is our contract. And it was also not a platform. It is the only time in American history that an entire legislative party, the House Republicans, campaigned on a contract. The difference is a platform says, I'm really for this, then they get elected, you go to the first meeting and say, well, I really meant to. The contract said, if you elect us and we're a majority, in the first 100 days, we will vote on these things. Straight up or down, you can measure it. And we kept our word. So it was a government document. It was both a political document and one of the most successful political documents in American history. We increased the Republican vote by 9 million over 1990, the largest one-party increase in an off year in American history. The Democrats went down 1 million, so the total swing was a 10 million vote swing. We went from 40% of the vote in 1990 to 53% of the vote in 1994. In that setting, it was also a management document, because when we got elected, I could turn to the Republican leadership and say, you know, we know what we're doing for the next 100 days. We don't need to talk about this. We gave our word. So for 93 days, actually Dick Armey did a great job as majority leader, and for 93 days, we drove through the contract. Now, what was the final result? Despite having a fair amount of the Senate that had not been part of the contract, had not signed on, despite having a liberal Democrat in the White House, we reformed welfare. 60% of the people on welfare either went to school or went to work, the most successful social policy in a generation. We cut taxes for the first time in 17 years. We balanced the federal budget for 4 years in a row, paid off $405 billion in federal debt, the largest debt repayment in American history. We put Congress under the same laws as small business, one of our commitments. The congressmen ought to experience whatever they pass. Businesses shouldn't have one set and congressmen have a different set. We created the Thomas system. How many of you have ever gone online and looked at the Thomas system where you can pull up Congress and look at it? Just raise your hand. You don't have to have a lobbyist, don't have to belong to a trade association, don't have to pay a penny. So we put Congress online for the world in a way that was brand new and back in 1995 considered pretty revolutionary. We had the first successful audit of the U.S. Congress in history. The Congress had never been audited in terms of its own finances. The first time we brought in an outside accounting firm, their first report was, we can't do an audit, there are no records. We had to actually invent the record-keeping system so you could audit it. That's how antiquated the House was when we took over. So my thought was, in writing Winning the Future, to take that scale of concept and say, all right, if we were doing it again, what would we do?